Doyen checked his delivery schedule for the third time that morning. 5 packages, 3 different star systems, all routine diplomatic correspondence. Nothing unusual. Nothing dangerous. Exactly how he liked it. He had been working as a courier for the Interstellar Diplomatic Courier Service for 5 years now. In that time, he had learned one important lesson. Boring was good. Boring meant he got paid, went home, and nobody tried to kill him. The galaxy was a strange place, filled with hundreds of alien species, and Doyen preferred to observe it all from a safe distance. His ship, a small vessel barely large enough for one person and cargo, hummed quietly as it docked at the refueling station. Doyen grabbed a quick meal from the automated dispenser. The food tasted like cardboard, but it was cheap and filling. He ate while reviewing the manifest for his next delivery, Velithos Prime, the Velithar Empire's homeworld. He had never been there before, though he had heard stories. The Velithars were an insectoid species, ruled by queens who controlled their populations through pheromones and some kind of mental connection. Their society was rigid and hierarchical. Workers stayed workers, warriors stayed warriors, and the queen ruled absolutely. Doyen felt a small twinge of nervousness. He generally avoided the more alien species when possible, not because he was prejudiced, but because misunderstandings happened easily. What seemed polite to humans might be insulting to others. Still, this was a high-paying job, and his rent was due next week. The journey to Velithos Prime took 2 days through hyperspace. Doyen spent the time reading, listening to music, and trying not to think too hard about the delivery. The package itself was small, sealed with official diplomatic markers. He had no idea what was inside. That was standard. Couriers who asked too many questions didn't stay employed for long. When his ship emerged from hyperspace, Velithos Prime filled his view screen. The planet gleamed like a jewel, covered in crystalline structures that caught the light of its blue sun. Cities sprawled across continents, each one looking like it had been grown rather than built. Doyen had to admit it was beautiful in an alien sort of way. He received clearance to land at the palace complex. His stomach tightened as he descended through the atmosphere. The palace itself was enormous, a towering structure of translucent crystal and organic material that seemed to pulse with life. Thousands of Velithars moved around it like ants around a hill. After landing, Doyen grabbed the sealed container and stepped out of his ship. The air smelled strange, sweet and sharp at the same time. 3 Velithar warriors immediately surrounded him. They stood nearly 7 feet tall with hard exoskeletons that shimmered in shades of green and blue. Their multifaceted eyes regarded him with an expression he couldn't read. Human courier Doyen, one of them asked in clicking, translated standard Galactic. That's me, Doyen said, holding up the container. Diplomatic delivery for Queen Nalith. The warriors escorted him into the palace. Doyen tried not to stare, but it was impossible. The interior was like nothing he had ever seen. Walls curved and flowed like they were alive. Bioluminescent patterns crawled across surfaces, creating shifting designs. Thousands of Velithars moved through corridors with perfect coordination, never bumping into each other, like they were all part of one organism. They walked for what felt like forever, going deeper into the palace. Finally, they entered a massive chamber. At the far end, sitting on a throne that seemed to grow from the floor itself, was Queen Nalith. Doyen had seen pictures of Velithar queens, but they hadn't prepared him for the reality. She was massive, easily twice the size of the warriors. Her exoskeleton was covered in iridescent plates that shifted through every color imaginable. A crown of crystalline spines grew from her head. Her eyes, compound and gleaming, fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to run. "Approach," one of the warriors said. Doyen walked forward on shaking legs. He had done hundreds of deliveries, met dozens of species, but something about this felt different. The queen watched his every step. The entire chamber had gone silent. Every Velithar present stood perfectly still. He reached the base of the throne and held up the container. Diplomatic delivery from the Galactic Coalition. I need a signature confirming receipt. A smaller Velithar, probably a court official, scuttled forward and took the container. She opened it, examined the contents briefly, then brought them to the queen. Nalith looked at the documents for a long moment, then made a gesture. The official produced a digital pad, and Nalith pressed one of her claw-like appendages against it. The official brought the pad to Doyen. He checked the signature, confirmed it was valid, and nodded. "Thank you. Delivery complete." He turned to leave, already thinking about his next job. Maybe he would stop at that noodle place on Station Theta 9. They made excellent dumplings. Stay. The word was spoken in perfect standard Galactic. Doyon froze. He turned back slowly. Queen Nalith was staring at him, her massive form leaning forward slightly on her throne. I'm sorry, Doyon said. You will stay, the queen said. Her voice was strange, resonating in a way that made his bones vibrate. As our honored guest, Doyon's mind raced. I appreciate the offer, Your Majesty, but I have other deliveries scheduled. I really need to— You will stay, Nalith repeated. This time it wasn't a request. The warriors moved, blocking the exits. Doyon felt his heart hammering in his chest. He looked around desperately, but every Velithar in the chamber was staring at him with those unreadable compound eyes. I don't understand, Doyon said, trying to keep his voice steady. Did I do something wrong? Is there a problem with the delivery? The queen didn't answer. She simply made another gesture, and 2 warriors stepped forward, flanking him. You are honored guest of the Velithar Empire, one of them said. You will be given finest quarters. All your needs will be met. But I need to leave, Doyon protested. I have a job. I have other deliveries. People are expecting me. You will stay, the queen said for the 3rd time. Then she settled back on her throne and stopped looking at him, as if the matter was decided. The warriors gently but firmly guided Doyon out of the throne room. He was too shocked to resist. His mind spun with questions. What was happening? Why did the queen want him to stay? Was this some kind of diplomatic incident? Would his company think he had abandoned his route? They led him through more winding corridors until they reached a set of ornate doors. Inside was a suite of rooms that would have been luxurious by any standard. Soft surfaces for sleeping, entertainment systems, windows that looked out over the crystal city. It was beautiful. It was also a prison. Wait, Doyon said as the warriors prepared to leave. Please, I need to contact my employer. I need to tell them what's happening. All needs will be met, one warrior repeated. Then they left, and Doyon heard the doors seal behind them. He stood alone in the luxurious room, staring at the alien city outside his window. He was trapped on a strange world, held by a queen he didn't understand, for reasons nobody would explain. And somewhere deep in the palace, Queen Nalith sat on her throne, her compound eyes reflecting patterns and possibilities that only she could see, watching threads of the future twist and turn around one simple human courier who had just delivered a package and wanted to go home. 3 weeks had passed since Doyon arrived on Velithos Prime. 3 weeks of living in a beautiful prison with no explanation. Every morning, a Velithar servant brought him food. The meals were carefully prepared, clearly designed for human biology. Someone had researched what humans could eat and made sure he was well fed. Every evening, the same servant returned to check if he needed anything. But whenever Doyon asked about leaving, the answer was always the same polite refusal. The servant's name was Hara. She was smaller than the warriors, with a lighter-colored exoskeleton that had hints of purple in certain lights. She belonged to the worker caste, she had explained, one of millions who kept the empire functioning. Unlike the warriors who rarely spoke, Hera seemed almost chatty, though she carefully avoided certain topics. Why won't anyone tell me why I'm here? Doyon asked one morning as Hera cleared away his breakfast dishes. Hera's antennae twitched. A gesture Doyon had learned meant discomfort. It is not my place to question the queen's decisions, she said in her clicking accent. But you must have some idea, Doyon pressed. This isn't normal, is it? Keeping a courier prisoner? You are not prisoner, Hera corrected quickly. You are honored guest. An honored guest who can't leave. Hera was quiet for a moment, organizing the dishes with precise movements. Finally, she said, the queen has never done something like this before. In all recorded history, the court officials are confused. The warriors are confused. Even the other queens on colony worlds are sending messages asking for explanation. Doyon sat up straighter. So this is unusual even for Velithars? Very unusual. Hera's voice dropped lower. The queen spoke to you. Out loud. In your language. She almost never speaks. We receive her commands through the connection, through pheromones and mental impressions. But she spoke actual words to you. The entire court is still talking about it. That was news to Doyon. He had assumed the verbal communication was normal. What does that mean? I do not know, Hera admitted. But it means you are important to her somehow. And what is important to the Queen is important to the entire empire. After Hara left, Doyen tried once again to send a message to his employer. The communication system in his room had access to entertainment, news, and information databases. But every time he tried to send an outgoing message, it was blocked. He had tried to access the human embassy, his company, even his family. Nothing got through. He was starting to worry that everyone thought he had simply disappeared. On the 25th day of his captivity, Doyen was summoned to the throne room again. His stomach churned with anxiety as the warriors escorted him through the palace. What did the Queen want now? The throne room was less crowded this time. Queen Nalith sat on her throne as before, massive and imposing. Her eyes tracked Doyen's approach with that same unsettling intensity. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to a cushion that had been placed near the base of her throne. Doyen sat, trying not to show his nervousness. The Queen watched him in silence for what felt like an eternity. Just when Doyen was about to say something, anything to break the oppressive quiet, Nalith spoke. What do humans feel when they see their homeworld from orbit? The question caught Doyen completely off guard. What? Your homeworld, Earth. What do you feel when you see it from space? Doyen thought about it. He remembered the last time he had visited Earth, the blue and green marble floating in the darkness. I guess. Nostalgia, comfort. It's home even if I don't live there anymore. It's where I came from. The Queen's antennae moved in a pattern Doyen couldn't interpret. You feel connection to place of origin? Yes, don't you? Velithars are born connected to Queen, to empire, to purpose. We do not choose connection. It simply is. She tilted her massive head. You choose to carry messages for species that could destroy you. Why? It's just a job, Doyen said, confused by the philosophical turn. I'm good at it. It pays well. I like traveling. Just a job, Nalith repeated slowly as if testing the words. You risk yourself for payment. Not for connection. Not for purpose, for money. When you put it that way, it sounds depressing, Doyen muttered. Something that might have been amusement flickered across the Queen's alien features. You are a strange creature, Doyen the courier. Can I ask you a question, Your Majesty? Ask. Why am I here? What do you want from me? The Queen was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. I do not know. I see patterns, possibilities, threads of future twisting and turning. In some threads, you leave Velithos Prime on schedule. In those threads, I see darkness. Ending. In threads where you stay, the paths are unclear but less dark. She leaned forward. I do not understand why simple human courier matters. But you do matter. The future insists upon it. Doyen's mouth went dry. You're keeping me here because of visions? Like prophecy? Not prophecy, probability. I see what might be, not what will be. But in all probable futures I can perceive. Letting you go leads to catastrophe. That's insane, Doyen said, then immediately regretted it. You probably shouldn't call an all-powerful alien queen insane. But Nalith didn't seem offended. Perhaps. Queens of Velithar have limited precognitive ability, tied to survival of our species. It is not perfect. It is not clear. But it has guided us through many dangers over millennia, and now it tells me that you must stay. Doyen felt overwhelmed. This was beyond anything he had trained for. Anything he had expected. He was just a courier. He delivered packages. He wasn't supposed to be important to the future of anything. What if your visions are wrong? He asked quietly. Then I will have imprisoned an innocent being for no reason, and I will carry that shame. Nalith said simply, but I would rather carry shame than watch the galaxy burn. The audience ended shortly after. Doyen was escorted back to his quarters in a daze. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what the Queen had said. Visions of catastrophe, threads of future. It sounded like something from a fantasy story, not real life, but it was real. He was living it. The next morning, Hera brought news. The human embassy has filed official complaint. They are demanding your release. Doyen felt a surge of hope. Will the Queen let me go? Hara's antennae drooped. No. The Velithar ambassador told them you are safe and honored. But the Queen will not explain why you must stay. The humans are very angry. I'm very angry too, Doyen said. I know. Hara hesitated, then said, If it helps, I do not think the Queen wishes to cause you distress. She believes she is protecting you. Protecting everyone. By keeping me prisoner. By keeping you close. Over the following days, Doyen started exploring the parts of the palace he was allowed to access. He discovered a library filled with crystal data storage, historical records of the Velithar Empire. Since he had nothing but time, he began reading. The history was fascinating despite his situation. The Velithars had survived countless threats over their long existence. Wars, plagues, cosmic disasters. And throughout their records, there were occasional mentions of queens forming unexpected bonds with outsiders. It was rare, maybe happening once every few thousand years, but it happened. In each case, the outsider had somehow been connected to a major crisis. Sometimes they provided crucial information. Sometimes they brought different perspective that saved lives. The records were unclear on specifics, wrapped in religious language about the queen's wisdom and the mysteries of the connection. But the pattern was there. Queens didn't form random attachments. When they fixated on someone, it meant something important was coming. One evening, after another strange audience where the queen simply watched him sit in silence for an hour, Doyen returned to his quarters to find something new on his table. It was a crystal ornament, one of the decorative pieces from Nalith's crown. It glowed with soft internal light. When Hera came by, she saw it and actually stepped back in shock. "She gave you a crown crystal?" "I guess so. She just handed it to me as I was leaving." Hara's entire body seemed to tremble. This is extremely significant. Crown crystals are personal items. Queens do not give them away lightly. To give one to an outsider. She looked at Doyen with something like awe. "You are truly important to her." I did not fully believe until now. Doyen stared at the glowing crystal. He didn't feel important. He felt trapped, confused, and very far from home. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was more happening here than he understood. 3 months had passed since Doyen became the unwilling guest of the Velithar Empire. What had started as a diplomatic curiosity had become a full-blown crisis. The human government was furious. The Galactic Coalition had gotten involved. Trade agreements were being threatened. Some species saw this as an opportunity to reduce Velithar influence in galactic politics. Others urged patience and understanding. But everyone wanted answers that the Velithars refused to give. On Earth, a young diplomat named Jiwoo had made Doyen's case her personal mission. She was junior staff at the embassy, relatively new to interstellar politics, but she refused to let the matter drop even when her superiors told her to be patient. She had never met Doyen, but the principle mattered. You couldn't just kidnap human citizens, even if you called them honored guests. Jiwoo spent her evenings researching everything she could find about Velithar culture, their queens, their history. The official records were limited. The Velithars were private about their internal workings, but Jiwoo was persistent. She eventually found a lead. There was a Velithar exile living on a remote human colony world. His name was Taman, and he had left Velithos Prime decades ago. One of the very few Velithars to ever abandon the connection with their queen. It was considered almost unthinkable in their culture. Jiwoo traveled to the colony and found Taman running a small shop that sold alien artifacts. He was old by Velithar standards, his exoskeleton dulled and scarred. When Jiwoo explained why she had come, Taman's antennae twitched with what might have been surprise. "The queen has bonded with a human?" he asked in heavily accented standard galactic. "We don't know if it's a bond," Jiwoo said. "She just won't let him leave." "Can you explain why?" Taman was quiet for a long time. Finally, he gestured for Jiwoo to follow him to the back of his shop. There he pulled out an old crystal data storage device, one that looked ancient even by Velithar standards. "Queens have gift," Taman explained. "They see patterns in time, threads of probability. Not clearly, not like knowing the future, but enough to sense when something is important for survival. When a queen fixates on someone, it means she has seen that person in many possible futures. It means they matter. Matter how? That is the question, isn't it?" Taman said. "Usually only becomes clear when the crisis arrives. But it always arrives. In all recorded history, when a queen bonds with an outsider, it precedes a major threat to the galaxy." Jiwoo felt cold. What kind of threat? Different each time: war, disease, cosmic disaster. The last bonding happened 2,000 years ago. The outsider was a traitor from a species that no longer exists. He remembered a tale from his people about an ancient weapon. That memory saved 3 star systems from destruction. Taman looked at Jiwoo with his compound eyes. Your Doyen knows something or will do something that the Queen sees as necessary for survival. She probably doesn't even know what it is yet, but her instinct tells her to keep him close. Jiwoo returned to her embassy with this information, more worried than before. If Taemin was right, something terrible was coming, and somehow a simple courier was connected to it. Meanwhile, on Valithos Prime, Doyen had stopped demanding his release. It wasn't that he had accepted his captivity. He still wanted to go home, but he had started to believe that maybe there was a reason for all this. The Queen summoned him regularly now. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes she simply observed him. Doyen had learned to ask her questions about Valithar history and culture, and Nalith seemed to appreciate his curiosity. Through these conversations, he began to understand how different their species were. Velithars lived in constant connection with each other and their queen. They shared thoughts and feelings through pheromones and low-level telepathy. Individual desires were secondary to the good of the empire. The idea of being truly alone, as humans often were, was terrifying to them. "Do you ever wish you could disconnect?" Doyen asked during one audience. "Just be yourself without the connection?" Nalith considered this. "That is like asking if I wish to stop breathing. The connection is what I am. Without it, I would be nothing." She paused. "But I understand the question. You humans are always alone inside your own minds. That must be frightening." "Sometimes," Doyen admitted, "but it also means we're free to think differently from everyone else. We can disagree, change our minds, go our own way." "Strange creatures," Nalith said, but her tone was almost fond. One night, Doyen had vivid dreams. He saw the Queen's throne room, but it was empty and dark. He saw stars going out one by one. He saw vast emptiness spreading across the galaxy like a disease. He woke up sweating, his heart pounding. When he mentioned the dreams to Hera the next morning, she looked concerned. "The Queen has been restless lately. She meditates in the vision chamber for hours. Something is troubling her." That afternoon, Nalith summoned not just Doyun but also Myung, one of the palace scholars who specialized in ancient Queen lore. It was the first time Doyen had been in a meeting with other Velithars beyond Hara and the guards. "I need your memory, human," Nalith said without preamble. "You have traveled widely as courier. You have visited many places. Tell me about archaeological sites, ancient ruins, places where old civilizations left remnants." Doyen thought back through 5 years of deliveries. "I've been to a few. Most were just quick stops. Research outposts, dig sites, nothing memorable." "Tell me anyway." So Doyun talked. He mentioned a dig on a frozen moon where they were excavating a city beneath the ice, a station orbiting a dead world covered in geometric patterns, an outpost studying crystalline structures that predated all known civilizations. When he mentioned the last one, Nalith leaned forward sharply. "Crystals? Describe them." "I didn't see much. I was just dropping off supplies." But the researchers were excited about something. They said the crystals formed patterns that might be some kind of writing or data storage. They mentioned finding evidence of a previous galactic civilization, one that existed before the Coalition, before any current species had space travel. Myung's antennae quivered with excitement. "Did they mention what happened to this civilization?" Doyen tried to remember. They said something wiped it out. Something they called the Silence. One of the researchers joked that it sounded like a horror story. The throne room went absolutely still. Nalith and Myung exchanged a look that even Doyen could read as alarm. "What?" Doyen asked. "What did I say?" Myung rushed from the room. Nalith sat back on her throne, her massive form somehow seeming smaller. "I need to show you something," she said quietly. She stood and gestured for Doyun to follow. They went deeper into the palace than he had ever been before, into chambers that felt ancient even by Valithar standards. Finally, they entered a room filled with more crystal data storage, but these were old, some cracked and dark. "These are the oldest records of the queens," Nalith explained. "Visions and warnings passed down through millennia. Most are vague, symbolic, but there is one recurring theme." She activated one of the crystals and images flickered in the air, darkness spreading, stars going silent. The ancients called it the Silence. They warned that it would return, but their knowledge was incomplete. "We thought it was myth." Doyen felt his skin prickle. The researchers mentioned it like it was historical fact. "They found evidence it destroyed the previous civilization. If it destroyed them," Nalith said slowly, "and if it is returning..." Myung rushed back into the room carrying more data crystals. I cross-referenced the archives. There are 17 references to the silence in our oldest records. All of them describe it as an ending, a consuming darkness that cannot be fought or fled. But the previous civilization survived it, Doyen said. At least for a while, right? Otherwise, how would they leave warnings? Nalith turned her multifaceted eyes on him. This is why you are here. This is what I saw in the threads of probability. You know something. You remember something. Something that matters. I just delivered supplies to a research station, Doyen protested. I barely talked to anyone there. But you remember. And that memory, that small piece of information, is crucial somehow. Nalith's voice was intense. The future threads are clearer now. I see the silence approaching. I see species panicking, fleets mobilizing against an enemy that cannot be fought. I see the galaxy dying, but I also see you. In the threads where you are here, where you share this memory, the darkness is not absolute. There is a chance. Dune sat down heavily. This was too much, too big. He was just one person. How could he possibly matter against something that destroyed entire civilizations? I need to contact that research station, he said. Find out what they learned. Maybe they know something that can help. Already being arranged, Nalith said. Over the next days, they tried to reach the archaeological outpost. The communication was difficult because the station was in a remote location. But when they finally got through, the news was terrifying. The research station had gone silent 3 days ago. Ships sent to investigate found nothing. The station was gone. The moon it orbited was gone. In their place was just empty space, as if reality itself had been erased. It's happening, Myung whispered. The silence is returning. Doyen looked at the star chart showing the location of the vanished station. It was on the galactic rim, far from inhabited space. But if it was spreading, how long until it reaches populated systems? How the news of the vanished research station spread through the galactic coalition like wildfire? At first, many species assumed it was some kind of accident or catastrophe. Space was dangerous. Sometimes stations failed. Sometimes things went wrong. But then more reports came in. An entire mining colony on the rim had gone silent. A patrol fleet investigating disappeared without sending a single distress call. Long-range sensors showed something impossible. Vast sections of space were simply going dark, as if stars themselves were being erased from existence. Panic set in. The Galactic Coalition convened emergency sessions. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to debate what to do. The problem was that nobody understood what they were facing. It wasn't an invasion. It wasn't a weapon. It was like reality itself was unraveling, spreading slowly but steadily inward from the galactic rim. Some species called for military action. The Kratheks, a warlike species known for their aggressive expansion, demanded a massive fleet be sent to the affected regions. We must fight this threat, their representative insisted. Whatever it is, we destroy it. But how do you fight something that wasn't alive? Something that didn't attack but simply consumed space itself? Other species proposed different solutions. The Velithar suggested a deep-time stasis protocol, putting entire populations in suspended animation until the threat passed. Others debated whether to flee the galaxy entirely, though nobody knew if that was even possible or where they would go. The coalition fractured into dozens of factions, each pushing their own agenda. Fear drove them apart when they needed to come together. On Earth, Jiwoo watched the emergency broadcasts with growing horror. She thought about what Taemin had told her. The Queen bonds with an outsider when a major crisis approaches. The crisis was here, which meant Doyen really was important somehow. She sent a message to Doyen's personal account, not knowing if it would get through. I don't know if you can read this, but I believe now that you're there for a reason. The galaxy needs you. Figure out why, please. The message reached Doyen 3 days later. He read it in his quarters on Velithos Prime while Hera brought his evening meal. Reading that someone back home believed in him, even though she had never met him, gave him a strange comfort. He had been working non-stop with Nalith, Myung, and now Taemin, who Jiwoo had convinced to return to Velithos Prime. The old exile had been reluctant, but the threat was too great to refuse. Despite decades away, he still cared about the galaxy. They had gathered every piece of information they could find about the silence. Ancient Velithar visions, records from other species' oldest archives, Archaeological data from a dozen dig sites studying pre-coalition civilizations. The picture that emerged was terrifying. The silence had appeared before roughly 50,000 years ago. It had consumed the previous galactic civilization, one far more advanced than the current coalition. That civilization had fought it, tried to contain it, and ultimately failed. Only fragments of their knowledge remained, scattered across dead worlds and forgotten ruins. But they must have slowed it down somehow, Doyen argued during one late-night session. Otherwise, it would have consumed the entire galaxy. Life wouldn't have had time to evolve again. Species wouldn't have developed space travel. Something stopped it or made it pause. Myung clicked thoughtfully. The records do suggest the silence is cyclical. It appears, consumes, then becomes dormant for tens of thousands of years. Perhaps it is a natural cosmic phenomenon like a tide. Tides can be predicted, Taman said. And if you know when a tide is coming, you can prepare for it. The ancients prepared, Nalith said. I see it in my visions, fragments of their efforts. But I cannot see clearly what they did. Doyen had been having the same dreams repeatedly. Dreams of the ancient civilization, their crystal installations, harmonic patterns that seemed to vibrate through reality itself. He had mentioned them to the others, but dreams weren't evidence. They weren't useful, except one night the dream changed. Instead of just seeing the installations, he heard them. A sound that wasn't quite sound. A frequency that resonated in his bones. When he woke up, he was humming it without realizing. Hera heard him and tilted her head. What is that melody? I don't know, Doyen said. It's from my dreams. It is pleasant, strange but pleasant. Like music, but also like mathematics. Doyen sat up straight. Music and mathematics. Humans had always seen the connection between the two. Harmony, frequency, rhythm. They were all mathematical concepts expressed through sound. But what if it was more than that? What if the ancients had used harmonic frequencies for something? He rushed to find the others. When he explained his theory, Myung immediately began searching the archives for references to sound or vibration in the ancient installations. What they found was remarkable. Many of the pre-coalition structures that had been discovered shared common features. Crystalline resonators, massive installations designed to broadcast across vast distances, all aligned with mathematical precision. They weren't just buildings, Doyen said, excitement building. They were transmitters, broadcasting harmonic frequencies, but broadcasting what? Taman asked. And why? Doyen closed his eyes, trying to capture the dream again. In his mind, he saw the patterns, felt the vibrations. They were singing to it, to the silence. They weren't fighting it with weapons or barriers. They were stabilizing reality itself with harmonic frequencies. Nalith's antennae stood straight up. That aligns with my visions. I see waves of energy spreading from the installations, not attacking the silence but changing the nature of space around it, making it solid, resistant to consumption. It makes sense theoretically, Myung said, pulling up calculations. If the silence consumes spacetime by destabilizing its quantum structure, then broadcasted harmonics at the right frequency could reinforce that structure. Like using sound to stabilize a vibrating object. But we would need to know the exact frequencies, Taman pointed out. And we would need installations large enough to broadcast across the affected regions. The ancients had thousands of years to build their network. We have months at best, Doyen thought hard. In his dreams he could hear the pattern, feel it in his bones. But could he translate that into usable data? He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't an engineer. He was just a courier who happened to remember delivering supplies to one research station. But that memory was important. He closed his eyes and forced himself to recall every detail of that delivery. The researchers had been excited about something specific. They had shown him images of the crystal formations. They had talked about how the patterns seemed to encode information in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They said the crystals were like holographic data storage, Doyen said slowly. Information stored in the structure itself, in the frequencies at which the crystals naturally resonated. They were trying to build a scanner to read it. If we could access their research, Myung said. If we could find other intact installations and study the patterns. The installation near the research station is gone, Taman reminded them. Consumed by the silence. But there are others, Nalith said. 17 known sites across the galaxy, some barely studied. If we could scan them all, compare the harmonic patterns. We would need cooperation from species controlling those territories, Doyen said. Full access to archaeological sites that have been restricted for decades. The coalition will never agree, Taman said bitterly. They are too fractured, too scared. Doyen looked at Queen Nalith. Then we convince them. Show them what we found. Explain that the ancients survived long enough to leave warnings, because they knew how to slow the silence. We can do the same if we work together. Nalith stood from her throne, her massive form somehow conveying determination. I will address the coalition personally. I have never attended their sessions before. My presence will demonstrate the severity of our situation. Over the following weeks, a desperate plan came together. Queen Nalith used her influence and the threat of the silence to push the coalition toward cooperation. It wasn't easy. The Krathek still wanted military solutions. Some species remained skeptical that the threat was real. Others were too paralyzed by fear to act. But slowly, grudgingly, agreements were made. Archaeological sites were opened for study. Scientists from dozens of species began analyzing the ancient installations, scanning the crystal structures, measuring their harmonic frequencies. Doyen worked with human engineers to design equipment that could read the multi-dimensional data encoded in the crystals. It was his pattern recognition, his ability to see connections between music and mathematics that made it possible. Other species scientists were more advanced technically, but they thought in different patterns. They approached the problem from their evolutionary frameworks. Humans, unremarkable humans, had something unique. They could see patterns across completely abstract systems. They could understand music as emotion and mathematics simultaneously. They could translate between languages and concepts that seemed unrelated. This is why you were needed, Nalith told Doyen during one of their private conversations. Not because you are strong or wise or powerful, but because The silence continued its inexorable advance. Star systems on the rim continued to vanish. Long-range sensors showed the darkness spreading like a stain across the galaxy. Entire civilizations evacuated their homeworlds, fleeing toward the galactic core. But everyone knew there was nowhere to run. If the silence wasn't stopped, it would eventually consume everything. Panic gripped the galaxy. Some species turned to religion, praying to gods they had forgotten. Others descended into chaos as social order broke down. The Kratheks mobilized their fleets and launched attacks against the advancing darkness, but their ships simply disappeared. You couldn't fight something that erased reality itself. On Velithos Prime, Doyen worked around the clock with scientists from 17 different species. They had successfully scanned all accessible ancient installations and compiled the harmonic patterns. The data was staggering in its complexity. The ancients had created a network of thousands of resonators, each broadcasting specific frequencies that reinforced the quantum structure of space-time itself. The problem was scale. The ancient network had taken centuries to build. The coalition had months at best. Building enough new installations to cover the affected regions was impossible. We need a different approach, Doyen said during one exhausted strategy session. We can't rebuild their entire network, but maybe we don't need to. Maybe we just need to understand the core principle and adapt it. Myung clicked thoughtfully. The installations all broadcast variations of the same fundamental pattern, like different notes in a single song. If we could synthesize the essential harmonic sequence and broadcast it using existing technology, added Jiwoo, who had become the human liaison for the project. She worked tirelessly, coordinating between human engineers and alien scientists. We have communication satellites throughout the galaxy, subspace relays, deep space beacons. If we could modify them to broadcast the harmonic pattern, the power requirements would be enormous, a Krathek's engineer objected. Our systems are not designed for continuous broadcasts at those frequencies. Doyen stared at the data, the swirling patterns that looked like music written in mathematics. In his dreams, he could hear it clearly now. Not one note, but a symphony. Layers of frequency working in harmony to create something greater than the sum of its parts. And suddenly he understood. It doesn't need to be continuous, he said excitedly. Look at the pattern. It's not a constant tone. It's pulsed. Like a heartbeat. Short bursts at precise intervals. That's why the ancients used so many installations. Each one broadcasted for brief moments but timed perfectly so the overall effect was continuous coverage. Like instruments in an orchestra, Jiwoo said, catching on. Each plays their part and together they create the complete piece. Exactly. Doyen pulled up calculations. If we network all available broadcast systems across the galaxy and synchronize them to pulse in sequence, we could recreate the harmonic coverage without needing the same infrastructure the ancients had. The Krathex engineers studied the numbers. This could work. The power requirements would be manageable in short bursts, but the timing would need to be perfect. Even small desynchronization would create gaps in the coverage. We have quantum communication networks, Myung said. Messages travel instantaneously across any distance. We could use them to coordinate the timing. For the first time in weeks, Doyen felt hope. How long would it take to modify the existing broadcast systems? If every species commits their resources, the Krathex engineer calculated, 3 weeks. 3 weeks. The silence would consume dozens more systems in that time. But it was their only chance. Queen Nalith addressed the Galactic Coalition again. This time her words weren't suggestions or requests. They were commands, spoken with the full weight of her species' authority and the desperate necessity of survival. This human has given us a path, she said, gesturing to Doyen who stood beside her, small and terrified but refusing to hide. His memory, his pattern recognition, his uniquely human ability to see connections between music and mathematics has shown us how to slow the silence. But we need every species to contribute. Every broadcast system, every engineer, every resource. If we work together, we survive. If we hesitate, we all die. The vote was unanimous. The next 3 weeks were the most intense of Doyen's life. He worked with engineers from species he had never met, translating the harmonic patterns into formats their different technologies could use. He barely slept. He survived on stimulants and determination. Jiwoo coordinated the human contribution. Earth's satellite networks, communication relays, even old exploration beacons were modified to broadcast the harmonic pattern. Other species did the same across the galaxy. Taman helped ensure the Velithar networks integrated properly. Despite his decades of exile, he worked as hard as any of them. I left my people, he told Doyen one night, but I never stopped caring about the galaxy. As the deadline approached, reports from the Rim grew worse. The silence had accelerated. It was consuming star systems faster now, as if sensing the resistance being prepared. Entire species fled their homeworlds, cramming into refugee ships, hoping for somewhere safe to go. We are out of time, Nalith said during the final coordination meeting. The network is ready? Ready, confirmed engineers from a dozen species. Then we activate now. Doyen watched from Velithos Prime as the command went out across the galaxy. Quantum communication networks coordinated billions of broadcast systems. In perfect synchronization, they began pulsing the harmonic pattern that Doyen had translated from ancient crystal installations, refined by the collective genius of the galaxy's scientists. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The silence continued its advance. Doyen felt his heart sink. Had they been wrong? Had his interpretation of the patterns been incorrect? Then sensors picked up something. At the edge where the silence met normal space, reality fluctuated. The darkness didn't retreat, but it slowed. The rate of consumption decreased. And slowly, gradually, it stopped. The entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Minutes passed. Hours. The silence remained still, neither advancing nor retreating. It sat at the rim like a wall of darkness, but it grew no larger. It worked, Jiwoo whispered. You actually did it? Doyen felt tears running down his face. We did it. Everyone did it. Together. The celebration that followed was tempered by loss. Dozens of star systems had been consumed. Millions of beings had died or lost their homes. The silence still existed, a constant threat lurking at the galactic rim. The harmonic network would need to be maintained indefinitely, requiring constant cooperation between species. But they had survived. The galaxy had been saved. In the aftermath, Doyen became an unlikely hero, though he tried to avoid the attention. Various species wanted to honor him, give him awards, make him a symbol. He refused most of it. He was just a courier who had delivered to a research station and remembered what he saw. You are more than that, Queen Nalith told him during their final private audience. You showed that significance is not about strength or technology. It is about being in the right place, paying attention, and caring enough to try. She finally offered him freedom. He could leave Velithos Prime, return to his life. But things would never be the same. Before he left, Hera gave him a gift. The crystal ornament Nalith had given him months ago had been set in a beautiful piece of jewelry. "So you remember," Hera said. "So you remember that small actions can matter more than grand ones." Doyen returned to human space, to Earth. Jiwoo met him at the spaceport, and they talked for hours about everything that had happened. She had been promoted for her role in coordinating the human response. He was offered countless positions with governments and corporations. He turned them all down. Instead, he returned to his old job as a courier. His company was happy to have him back, though they treated him with new respect. His first delivery after resuming work was to a small research station studying ocean ecosystems on a colony world. As he handed over the packages, he actually paid attention to what the researchers were doing. He asked questions about their work. He learned that they had discovered something interesting about how certain organisms communicated through vibrations in the water, creating complex patterns that might be a form of language. It was probably nothing important, just basic research that might never lead anywhere significant. But Doyen took notes anyway. Because he had learned that you never knew when some small piece of information might matter. The galaxy was vast and full of mysteries, and sometimes, just sometimes, a simple human courier paying attention to seemingly insignificant details could make all the difference. He left the station and plotted a course to his next delivery. The star chart showed thousands of systems, billions of beings all going about their lives. The silence still lurked at the rim, held back by the harmonic network that required constant maintenance and cooperation. The galaxy had been changed. Species that had barely acknowledged each other before now worked together daily to maintain the network. The threat had forced cooperation, and that cooperation was creating something new. Not a perfect unity, but a genuine attempt to move forward together. Doyen smiled as his ship entered hyperspace. The universe was strange and often frightening.